come on in, make yourselves comfortable. Don't be shy. And you know our policy. Feel free to make yourself. Mine, by the way, just for the record, mine is a cup of peppermint tea in a Darth Vader mug. Something tells me Darth Vader could have been doing with some mint to deal with his throat issue.
Is there anything we should be reading into this? Is there...
Yes.
So grab your brew, or if you're having one, you know, a dram, whatever you're having yourself, as they say.
I'm looking down the windows. There's mugs going on.
Yeah. People tend to arrive in a very comfortable state. You will see some people prostrate on the couch and smoking.
I have nothing but respect for that.
Yeah. So anyway, we'll get going. Welcome to the Mythical Ireland Library, everybody. I'm Anthony Murphy, as you know, of Mythical Ireland. This is Live Irish Myths and Conversation, episode number 10. It is my tremendous honour this evening to welcome the Prehistory Guys, who in their regular life go by the names of Michael Bott and Rupert Soskin. I know that you'll all be, I hope, familiar with their work and looking forward to having an interesting conversation this evening. There are a few announcements that I have to make before we begin. The first one is to say, as usual, that everything that happens at Mythical Ireland is supported by Mythical Ireland patrons over at patreon.com/Mythical Ireland. You can become a patron for as little as $1 a month, or if you want to pledge more, you get rewards, and those rewards can be seen on the Patreon homepage there at patreon.com/Mythical Ireland. Thank you for all your support. If you want to specifically help the live conversation series, especially with regards to the Zoom costs, you can make a small contribution to paypal.me/Mythical Ireland. That's paypal.me/Mythical Ireland. And I should mention, absolutely can't allow the opportunity to pass without mentioning Return to Segish, which
yes, congratulations. Yes,
is my thanks. Is my new book, number 7, published in the past week to 10 days. Order your signed copy. Remember, I know the bookshops are closed, but I can post. Our postal service delivers all over the world, and you can order your copy on mythicalireland.com. Anyway, it is my tremendous pleasure to welcome Michael and Rupert to the library this evening. And there is one question that I must kick off with, and it is this. I've been following you two guys for a while, as you know. I was a big fan of your movie, and we'll talk about that. And I've been following you online for the past few years. And I have to ask this because it isn't immediately clear. Which one of you is in charge?
What a great and perceptive kind of question. I don't think any one of us regards themselves as in charge. I don't. But what about you, Rupert?
No, I think we never do anything without discussion, and equally, we've never disagreed about anything. Sometimes we'll debate the best ways of doing things, and we might come from different angles with different opinions, but we always agree on the ultimate opinion. We've never had an argument in the how many years now? Lots.
Lots, yeah.
No, in fact, it's one of the joys of our working relationship that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. We're just very lucky.
The funny thing is, when it comes to the major things that, we think we may have been machinating something over weeks, months, whatever. If one of us says, hang about, I think it's time we did this, we usually find that the other's been thinking the same thing anyway. Yeah. So there's very little debate in that kind of way. And we're both aware of our own, what strengths and we bring to each bit of the project.
And if anything, that's happening more as as we've been working together longer. I mean, even was it yesterday or was it this morning that we speak every day pretty much about one aspect of work or another. And this morning it was, I said, I wanted to talk to you about, no, you go first. And basically Mike just said to me exactly what I was going to say to him. So no, I don't think it would work if one of us was in charge, it's,
Sounds great. Yeah, you'd certainly have that you kind of have that air about you that your two plays don't row very much. But I thought maybe perhaps, watching some of those outtakes from Standing with Stones, that perhaps there were occasions when you might have gone to fisticuffs over certain things. It is customary of me to begin by asking, and I have to ask each of you individually, to tell us a little bit about your origins. Where do you come from, where you grew up, and especially, of course, how you first became interested in prehistory. And because nobody's in charge, I'll throw that one to Rupert first.
Oh, okay. Wow, seriously, you want to know that? Do you want my passport and a blood sample as well?
Not that kind of detail.
I grew up I was born in Kensington, in London. I moved to Kew when I was 4. I grew up in Kew. And one of the joys was that this was, I don't know how many of you know Kew Gardens, but this was back in the day when it cost 1 old penny that you would just put in a turnstile and get into Kew Gardens, not the 25 quid that you have to pay these days. And so as a small boy, when parents didn't worry about where their kids were during the day, I used to get home from school, take off my school uniform and just go to Kew Gardens, because it was only a 10-minute walk away. And I would put my penny in the stile. I always had enough pocket money for that. And I would just spend hours on my own, just in nature. That was just heaven for me. That's what I did. Or go walking down by the river. And that's where my love of nature grew. It was natural history was my, it still is one of my huge loves and other hat. And what got me into this? We've had this conversation quite a few times, probably, Michael and I, over the years. I just always loved any of the ologies, whether it was geology, archaeology, paleontology. It didn't matter what it was. It was just, if it was to do with nature in some way, and then prehistory, because it's the magical aspects of prehistory, isn't it? And by chance, I started off. Somebody asked me if I would give some natural history tours, and that became doing archaeology tours. I took people around prehistoric sites all over the place. The Isle of Man being one place in particular that I did many trips to the Isle of Man, where Michael grew up. And that's really what kicked all, my real love of prehistory off, and then Michael and I getting together. I mean, it was because, you'll know. I mean, Mike is just an absolutely brilliant filmmaker, and I approached him about, could we do a project together that was completely unrelated, and we decided. We decided it was Mike's idea. Let's do something that we both know something about first. And it was, well, what do we both know about? Megalithic sites. Yeah, okay, we'll do that then. And that's really how it started. Brilliant. If that answers your question.
Yeah, and we're going to be talking about Standing with Stones in a while, but in the meantime, I'll pass the same question to Michael. Michael, perhaps you could tell us about your origins.
I was born on the Isle of Man. There's absolutely no connection between that and the fact that, Rupert eventually, was doing tours there. Completely coincidental. Yeah. I was born on the Isle of Man. I only lived there till I was 6 years old. And then we moved to Oxfordshire, to near Banbury. My father was an actor. That will become, important later on. But I think it was about 8 years old. They took me to the Rollright Stones, which is not that far from Banbury. I think it was an outing into the Cotswolds, and it just stuck in my brain. I don't think it meant anything to me at the time, but strangely enough, these things kind of stick in some strange way. The enigma of a place, it's very rare. It brings you up short, I think, when you're growing and your brain's going, and you come up against an enigma that nobody's got an answer for. Something's stuck. At the time, I was bored out of my senseless, I think, but something stuck. But like that, my first job, my most of my life, I've been a professional actor, but that's precarious, as you all know. But from time to time, I slipped the other side of the camera, and as that side of it grew, I thought, well, what do I want to do with this thing, this camera thing? I ran my wife and I ran a video company making training films and stuff like that. So having the kit, thought, what can I do? Very long story short. Bumped into Rupert after I had done a few other documentaries, and it just seemed the opportunity to create the magnum opus.
Yeah,
and so we did.
Not only are you able to read each other's minds, you're able to read my mind, and you've already answered about 6 of the questions that I'm about to have. But it's right.
Well, it's been pleasant. It's been great conversation.
Yeah. So all that remains for me to say is, don't forget to be on YouTube. See you all. Bye. Yeah, because the next question was, when and where did you meet? So perhaps give us the specifics. When was it,
Rupert,
you guys first meet?
It's about 1999, something.
Yeah,
around about then.
I'd just come back from Colombia. I led a few.
You weren't flying little planes from the States down to Colombia.
He had the hat for it.
I did have the hat for it. I've still got the hat for it. No, I led a couple of expeditions down there. I went over there a few times to spend time with the Kogi Indians, who are a remarkable culture. They're the descendants of the Tairona civilization, who the Spanish thought they'd wiped them out, but they'd just disappeared into the jungle. Wow. Which is one of the most harsh jungles in the world, actually. You get bitten by, if going to the loo is precarious, you get bitten by anything within a 30-mile radius. but no, I'd just come back from one of the trips to Colombia, and I was over at my dad's house, who lived in Gloucestershire, and Mike, who knew my dad, was just coming over to visit. And
I knew Rupert's dad before I knew Rupert.
So that's a
long story there.
It is a long story, but that's basically that's when and where.
1999.
Yeah,
that's really interesting. That's really when it all began for me, when I met somebody who's still a good friend of mine. That's Richard Moore, who I've done a lot of work with. It seems to have been a good year. I was getting the impression there for a moment that you two were perhaps something like twins separated at birth, I
know, yeah.
Ability to read each other's minds and to fall into each other's paths. But,
yeah.
So how we got to know you, as in we, the general public, was in the aforementioned Standing with Stones film, which I think was brought out, is it 2008, am I right?
Yes, that's right.
And tell me a little bit about, Rupert, you approached Michael and asked him, could we do a film? What did you have in mind at the time? Did you think it would turn out to be so?
It was nothing to do with it was nothing to do with archaeology in any way. It was a natural history film, because that was my main hat, and I particularly wanted to do a film about it doesn't matter. There's all sorts of aspects of, one of the things that we both have a passion about is there's no point making a film unless you're telling people things that they don't know, is what we feel. Otherwise you're just showing somebody holiday snaps, that unless you can actually give somebody information that's useful and interesting.
Yeah.
And so there were aspects of natural history that were important to me, that generally speaking, science sometimes dismisses them or ignores them completely, certainly ignores them in terms of human behavior when, if you think, for example, it's only 1970s, roughly, that people even accepted the notion that pheromones might be having an impact on people's behavior. Prior to that, it was just don't talk nonsense. And so it was things like that, it was aspects of behavior in the animal world that I could show applied to human behavior. And that's what I wanted us to make a film about. But it was such a huge undertaking. And, when you think, you look at David Attenborough quality of broadcasts on the BBC, how many millions do they cost? And, my skills then, okay, stills photographer, yes. And I think I write reasonably well. I had no idea at all about the logistics of making a film, and I'd seen that Mike is just an exceptional filmmaker. So it was, well, I'll talk to Mike, let's do this. And that was why, Mike said, that's a bit of a big one. Let's start off with something simpler. And
let's start off with things that don't move.
yeah. But the thing is that neither of us imagined that we would just get on so well. We'd been best mates since that time. We just get on so well. Neither of us really just saw that coming. And equally, neither of us saw that we just enjoyed what we were doing so much that the whole prehistoric thing, it just grew and we grew with it. What we've learned from doing this, even just in the last few years of doing the online stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Our knowledge and understanding of certain things, it's just grown immeasurably. So there's kind of no point in going backwards, really.
Yeah. I thought that having viewed it for the first time, one of the things that hugely impressed me about Standing with Stones was the amount of time that went into it and the number of locations that you covered. That must have been some challenge, Michael, was it?
It's the time that went into it. That tells you why film crews are usually pretty big.
Yeah.
Because there are so many things usually to be done in parallel, or can be done in parallel, which, so things can get done over a period of weeks or months. I was doing in series, and every aspect of it, which is a crazy, nutty thing to do. But sorry, I've forgotten what the root of your question was there.
Well, I was just talking about how big it was in terms of time and effort. I mean, how long were you shooting Standing with Stones?
Oh, yeah. From first turning over of the camera to it sort of creating the DVD, it was at least 2.5 years.
Wow. And how long were you on the road for? Rupert's giggling.
Gosh, adding it up, I suppose, what, a total of 8-10 weeks in the camper?
Mm-hmm.
I think, something like that, because it was 3 weeks down Cornwall doing the south, and then we took off. Yeah, something like that. And that was spread over, the first outing, I think, in the camper was me on my own, actually, in 2015. And
when you got stuck.
2005.
Oh, he got stuck, did he? Tell us more about that.
Then we filmed in 2006 and 2007, in about, four tranches of four big expeditions, the last one being up to Scotland and up through Cumbria, up to Scotland and the islands, and then back down to Northumbria.
That was a serious commitment. It still stands the test of time. Yeah,
I mean, this is it's the upside of having been in a precarious profession in the first place. An employed person that has been employed all their life would really think twice about
That's a good point, actually.
Yeah,
that
really think twice. We've all both been self-employed, or one way or another. So this freelance bit, it opens your mind as to what's possible.
I think it's the case with all artists, anybody. I mean, I write, but I need a full-time job to pay the bills.
I know. I mean, hats off to you. You're prolific, and you've got a full-time job.
Yeah,
makes us look silly, actually.
But can I just say, so just to introduce this next bit, that at the time I saw the DVD and I watched it and I rewatched it and I loved it, I had the impression that, right, Rupert is the actor, Rupert is the screen guy, and Michael is the cameraman and the technical guy. But I came to find out afterwards, not knowing much about either of you, that in fact, Michael, you're no stranger to the screen at all. Now Tracy's going to show us something for a moment.
Oh, right. Cool.
I hope.
Oh.
Yet is it not an oversight, leaving the edges of empire to a fighting force so weak and undisciplined? No man with less experience would say, apply more discipline, more rigorous training, but I tell you, this tactic will not work. Rome needs to send us a higher quality of soldier.
I have requested that at your insistence several times, sir.
I know. The silence from Rome speaks loudly. It's pretty clear. He struggles to maintain healthy relationships, especially with women. It makes me wonder what he does to compensate. You see, I'd be a little suspicious of a man like that. But you seem to pick some unfortunate friends, don't you, Sergeant Hollins? First you cozy up to Weston, and now Dr. Clay. See, here's the thing. I think you know exactly what they've been up to. But you put your loyalty to them ahead of all else, don't you? Don't you?
Osborne. This was good.
Dr. Osborne, in what condition did you find Lady Worsley?
She had a number of complaints, all of which I fancy were the consequence of venereal disease. Every little setback destroyed her. However much I tried, I couldn't make it better.
If only someone had believed her at the time.
Oh, it would have changed everything. I know it would.
Her life would have been different.
Yeah. So would mine. You'll always work for me. You know too much.
Bravo. So, Rupert, is that what he said to you to get you to work with him? You always work with me. You know too much.
You know too much.
Well, I think we've seen your talent on both sides of the camera, Michael. It takes an extraordinarily versatile type of person to be able to do that, does it not?
Yeah, I won't bang my own drum as far as that is concerned. Sometimes I do turn around and think, well, versatile, yeah, okay. They can write that on my tombstone. Fair enough.
Yeah, you seem good at, sorry for saying this, but somebody else has commented on it. You seem good at playing the bad guy.
Yes, I seem to sort of carve myself a little niche just back there around about, what was it, 2014 and 15. I had a good stint in Doctors, the soap that they make in Birmingham. I was in a couple of nice films more latterly, though. Which didn't make it to the show reel that time round, but no, it's been cool, as they say, and it's been on off.
Yeah, I can understand the capricious nature of the work, but I was sitting watching a very well-known movie one night with my wife,
Yes.
Darkest Hour.
That's right.
Winston Churchill. And next minute, there's Michael Bott standing on the balcony, and I'm saying, look who it is, look who it is. Like, who is it? I said, that's Michael from, Standing with Stone. Said, oh yeah. Yeah, brilliant. And had you done any work, Rupert? Had you done any film work before Standing with Stones? I mean, obviously Michael had.
I had done one other documentary. Yeah, I think just one other documentary that I didn't write, and it was about the Merry Maidens, actually. And I hope the makers of this particular film don't hear me say this out loud, but it was pretty dreadful. But nevertheless, it was good fun. It was, it was good fun to do. But no, just one. And in actual fact, I mean, you can probably tell in Standing with Stones that, when it kicked off, I was still really uncomfortable in front of the camera, even though it was just me and Michael. I just felt such a twat in front of the camera.
Yeah. No, I'm not agreeing that you felt, well, I know you say you felt a complete in front of the camera, but the thing is to learn that nobody knows that unless you know.
Yeah.
But the USP, the thing that bring, not so much from being in front of the camera, making films, TV, that kind of thing, but from before that, I was much more to do with theatre. And repeating stuff over and over in front of an audience, and getting the first-hand thing with all the adrenaline going of what works and what doesn't, and having that feeling of sustaining a storyline, a narrative through to its end. It sort of gets into your blood, and that's, if anything, I try to carry into filmmaking is just making sure that thread, that narrative, just gets buoyed up through whatever means you can through a film, and make sure it has a beginning, a middle, and an end, a denouement, and a satisfying round off.
Was it heavily scripted? Because it presented the impression of being very well planned. But
yeah, well, it was all scripted.
Yeah.
It was all scripted. There were a couple of places, just a couple of places, where I would have an idea on the ground, and one of them in particular was Gorsfowr in just near the Preselis, where it was a very dry. When I say dry, I mean the bit of film was very dry, and I had an idea, and I said, "Oh, Mike, hang on, just film," and I just made it up about that, what were they thinking bit, and there were a couple of bits like that. Taking my sun compass out at the Rock Art in Scotland, that was another one that we made up. Ken Barn, that we made up on the spot. But apart from that. No, it was all scripted, and what happened a lot was, because a lot of the sites were places that neither of us had ever visited before, and so the plan was that we would arrive at a site to do a good recce of it, and then we would regroup to the van where we would prepare for shooting the following day. And what happened on so many occasions was, having read all these textbooks, all these books that everybody took as gospel, and we'd get there and we'd look at each other and say, "Well, that's not right." And so all the script that I had written previously, and it would be, no, we've got to rewrite that, and so it would be back to the camper van. And rewrite script to be recording the following day. And sometimes, even when you write the words, it doesn't mean they stay in there. And particularly because, sometimes, we would finish working at midnight, sometimes later. and we'd be up before dawn every day just in case it was a good, sunrise or something to shoot. So we did work like dogs. I mean, it's lucky that we were having such a good time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the basic answer to your question is yes, it was fully scripted, apart from a couple of bits that we just made up on the spot.
Yeah.
Yeah, it certainly looked that way. The outtakes are hilarious too. Somebody's asking us, is the Standing with Stones film still available on DVD? But the whole thing is on your YouTube channel, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
So we may, if somebody gets a moment, maybe Tracy might find the film on YouTube and just paste in the link. Is it still available to buy on DVD?
Yeah, if people actually, yeah, you can get it from America.
An MTSE import.
Yeah, but it's all areas, so it'll play anywhere.
Yeah, there's a company in the US that still has DVD distribution rights, so should be able to find it.
Is that a message from Sam Harris just popping up, Ellis?
Yeah, there's a link there. I presume that's the link to Standing with Stones, and if that's the case, thank you, Sam, for that. Is it a case then that you kind of disappeared from the scene for a number of years and suddenly you popped up again online, which I was delighted about. And I know that you were initially, you branded yourselves as the Standing with Stones. We'll get to the Prehistory Guys in a moment. And how did that come about? Again, was that related to your sort of precarious employment situation, Michael, that you just said, sure, look, why don't we try do something?
Well, yes, but it wouldn't have happened that way if it hadn't been for a tranche, a small cult following, a little group of people, mostly on Facebook, that just stuck around and continually said, when are you going to make the next film?
Yeah.
And it was just that we always had that little interaction going. We were doing other things, and off on different paths and doing that midlife crisis things of what on earth am I going to do?
You speak
next?
for yourself.
Well, yeah, I am speaking for myself. That sort of thing. Yeah, I mean, after that flurry of going back to acting again, and then coming out of that and seeing the road empty before, well, this is silly. We've got a brand, we've got a really fantastic asset, and a good enough fan base to build from. Yeah. Why don't we do this podcasting thing?
Yeah,
that was it.
And can you remember when exactly that was? 5 years ago?
Well, it's almost exactly 3 years ago.
3 years ago, okay. So not that long.
Yeah. I mean, just over 3 years ago, we would have been plotting and sort of telling people this is what we're going to do, and just lining people up and getting them to expect a brand new podcast for us. And yeah, the plot was to use the podcast and to employ Patreon to build up enough following to eventually get round to making another film, getting out on the road again. At the same time as we were doing the podcast, occasionally ducking out and making the occasional film, much shorter films, much more niche films, but nevertheless.
Yeah. Were you surprised at how quickly it took off then?
Well, not really. It didn't really. I mean, it was good. It was kind of what you'd expect for a podcast. It did grow. But the thing that happened was almost exactly this time last year. My son said to me, "Hang about." Standing with Stones was on YouTube, but it was there in 7 parts, and it had always been there in 7 parts. Because of back when I put them up there, it was difficult to put a 2.25 hour film up onto YouTube, all in one piece. It was nuts. It had been there, but nobody had been really watching it. He said, "Why don't you put the full movie up on there?" So I did a quick sort of remastered it slightly, tweaked the color, gave a bit more contrast and stuff like that, and put it up there. And within a couple of weeks, it went bananas. I mean, it so took us by surprise. We thought we were a couple of podcasters that had the occasional film on YouTube, and suddenly to ride this horse that was galloping off over the horizon, we had to get on it and become YouTubers. So, and that's where it really started to take off. On the back of that, and that's where we had to readjust what we were thinking in terms of our output and how to ride that galloping horse to the best advantage.
Around that time, then you made the decision to rebrand. Rupert, how big a decision was that? You were known to all and sundry, including you had a good following in Ireland, I would say. You know, from Standing with Stones to the Prehistory Guys, that must have been a sort of a nervous moment too, was it?
That was Mike's idea, and a very good idea, because you know, I mean, the point was that if you had been a fan, you know, and it has to be said that something that we both found extraordinary was that the film came out in 2008, and we went off and we did other things. But it had been serialized on one of the cable channels. And literally, at least every week, we were getting fan mail from people who had seen the film and had bothered to look up, you know, my email address to write and say, I really enjoyed your film. And you know, and we thought, well, hold on, when was the last time you watched something on telly and thought, I know what, I'll send them a note? You know, like never. So I thought, well, if this amount of people are writing to say they enjoyed it, then there must be a lot of people who are enjoying it, which is amazing. And so the thing was that unless you had been a fan, then Standing with Stones didn't actually mean anything. And so it was Mike that came up with the idea of, do you know what, we need to brand ourselves as, you know, say what's in the tin. And the Prehistory Guys was just, you know, it was such a good idea. That was him.
Yeah, Standing with Stones is a great name for a film, and if we do another, when we do the next one, it'll be Standing with Stones 2.
Yes.
But it's not a good name for a couple of blokes running a podcast, because it just doesn't tell you anything.
Yeah. I remember thinking at the time, wow, that's risky, right? Was my first reaction. But then when I stood back from it, I realized, because you're right. Standing with Stones is perhaps too narrow. Yeah. You're thinking of Standing Stones, and of course you're talking about much more than Standing Stones. You're dealing with the whole period of prehistory. So it was a brave move, and obviously
and to be fair, you know, when we did change over, it did get a boost. Actually, the numbers did start to go up. And I also have to acknowledge a guy called Andy Waring, who's a friend of mine. You know, and it's one of those things. Well, it's good to have angels. Good to have angels that will tap you on the shoulder and say, I don't think this is quite working. Because you know, you get blind to where you are. You get stuck in your own niche and your own habits. And Andy, strangely enough, I was on an archaeological dig with Tim Darville on a barrow up in the Cotswolds. And Andy was also on that dig. I knew him from before, but he'd said, come on the dig with Tim, so I did. And it was when we were on that dig that he said, I think you should probably think about, you know, just changing the branding a bit.
We owe him a drink, really, don't we?
We do owe Andy a huge drink, you know, because he's been a huge supporter, you know, in the background. Yeah.
It's wonderful to have that kind of support, isn't it, though? I have too. I have,
you know, folks that have got your back, you know.
Yeah, it's brilliant. And it's just sometimes you actually do, don't you? I mean, I know I do. Sometimes I feel I'm in a vacuum. I think I am so in love with this material. I talk so much about megaliths and mythology and the landscape and photography and all, and astronomy and all the alignments. And then sometimes I sit down and I just think about it for a moment. I think, I'm the only one that's actually manically interested in this stuff. And then just to prove you wrong, 10 minutes later you get a lovely long email from somebody who's watched the video or have read one of the books and said, Anthony, really loving what you're doing, just wanted to say thanks and encourage. And it's a lovely, just the encouragement just spurs you on to do more, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And can I echo that? What you're doing is absolutely fabulous, Anthony.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, well, hats off to you, because you're prolific as well. I don't know how you do it.
I don't watch TV.
Good move.
I mean, I watch
even so
videos.
Even so, I don't know how you find enough hours in the day. Does your wife know what you look like, really?
Actually, one of the reasons I'm able to do what I do is because I have a hugely supportive wife and family. And the support sometimes is in the form of just let him go and do his thing, you know. And that I don't take that for granted. I mean, there's been times because of Mythical Ireland that I've been missing from home for several days in a row.
Yeah.
I mightn't see the family except for, you know, on a Facebook video or whatever, you know.
Yeah.
And it's lovely to have that. You have the family support, and then you have the fan base, and all of that encourages you to keep going, because without it, as I said, you do kind of feel like you're in a vacuum somewhere.
Well, I think we can both echo that. Lost without, you know, the encouragement and support of
totally.
of our wives.
Totally. I mean, it is genuinely such a relief, you know, when you know, I go over to the house and I tell Julie, you know, what news we've got, you know, of whatever's happened in the day, you know, and she's genuinely interested and you know, and enthusiastic about it, you know, as opposed to I know a lot of people who they tell their spouses, you know, whatever, and it's okay, you know, this, you know, whatever. No, we're very, very lucky. Very lucky.
Really, I still have to tell you this just briefly. There was a really lovely moment about a month back, I think, several weeks ago, when a courier arrived at the door with a parcel, and usually those parcels are for me, but in this case, it was for Anne, my wife, and it was actually one of, I think, my patrons. I'm pretty sure it was one of my patrons. A lovely rich box of chocolates, just to say thank you for everything that you do to support in the background. And
what a fabulous thing!
Yeah, fast, have to say. Anyway,
and talking of talking of Patreon supporters, I don't know about you, but we've got a fantastic, you know, an active group of people that are so encouraging and so on board with what we're doing.
Well, I think it's important to recognize them at every opportunity, because the difference between a supporter and a patron is that a patron is basically pledging per month. And that's valuable, because if you're going to grow and you're going to expand in what you do, that costs money. It does. It costs money. I mean, it costs money to run hosting services and websites. It costs money if you're going filming, to just put diesel in the car, stuff like that people just don't realize. And they're willing to do that because they believe in what you're doing. They've seen what you've done and they're impressed by it, and they want you to keep going. And it's, to be honest, certainly from the point of view of Mythical Ireland, I couldn't do what I do without that support. And hats off, absolutely.
Yeah, no, they are, you know, they're very special people to us. You know, it's that thing of, it's all very well. I'm going to sound like I'm being dismissive now. I'm not, but you know, it's all very well, you know, on YouTube when people they're interested enough to subscribe to your channel, you know, because they want to see what you produce. You know, but the gulf of difference between the people who will take whatever you're prepared to put out there for free and the people who actually say, no, I love this, I want to help you do it, and, you know, and actually put their hands in their pockets to help you carry on doing the work. That's a very different space, and we appreciate them enormously.
And in fact, we might just ask you for your Patreon address. It's probably patreon.com, the Prehistory Guys, is it?
It is.
/the Prehistory Guys.
Exactly that.
So there you go. Folks. If you want to support these two wonderful
Thank you very much.
Work that they do, please do. So moving on a little bit, I have a question for each of you separately, and that is, do you each have a particular favorite period of prehistory?
Well, I think the clue is in, you know, what the subject that we took for the film, and that would have to be the Neolithic period stretching from about 4000 BC up to 2500 BC. And, centered because it's the fascination of our megaliths, that's what kicked the whole thing off. But what's been extraordinary about the last 3 years is the kind of context that all that history has had to be put. And also naming ourselves the Prehistory Guys. We've had to broaden our interest, to bring in, to honour that name. But when it comes back down to it, it is a fascination with understanding what was going on in the country, that in the land, that had these monuments be produced. That's the mystery, that's the enigma that keeps us going. And we're so glad to be just beginning to unravel a few things. We'll never have complete answers, of course, but the I was going to say honour almost of being able to piece things together, or have a perspective that maybe somebody else doesn't, studying the period and all the data that's coming out, the fresh stuff. There's so much fresh stuff coming out, new perspectives, that it's a very exciting thing to do. But then realising that that's a very long period, in terms of years, that's a very long period. And if you're going to get granular, into that period and realise, all the monuments I can see together in the landscape don't actually belong together. That monument there precedes that monument there by 1,000 years. Yet here I can see them both together. We've got to tease that apart. We've got to get in there, in order to understand properly what's going on.
Yeah, it's an honor. That's a great word, actually. It's an honor to do that kind of work, isn't it, Rupert?
We are we're so fortunate in that whilst we have got friends in the archaeological community, and we've got the support of some pretty lofty archaeologists, the reality is we're still outsiders, which means that we can say whatever the hell we want. And one of the real joys is that because we're not constrained within the walls of academia, where there is a certain expectancy of how you're having to view certain things, because we're looking at stuff globally and genuinely being able to join dots that frankly don't really get looked at as discrete dots a lot of the time, and we're pulling all these strands together and seeing commonalities that very often just get missed. And it's really exciting when you find something completely unexpected, and a great example is that some of you might have seen in the news only recently that some 9,000-year-old hunting structures have been found at the bottom of Lake Huron, between the United States and Canada. And because water, the lake levels back then were massively deeper, like 100 meters deeper, shallower. And the thing is that these 9,000-year-old hunting structures that they've found are pretty much the same as the hunting structures that nobody's actually dated, but that you find over in Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. Wow. And so you look at these things and you think, well, what's the connection there then? Because they really are the same. And it's like, well, is it like convergent evolution, where it was such a good idea, it was going to happen in more than one place anyway? Although it doesn't actually seem that intuitive to me, the way that and so you start looking at strands that, well, can you actually show that that these might genuinely be connected? And there are certain things that we still need to dig a little bit deeper. But you know,
we have a particular concern with earthen structures, do we not, Rupert? And so, you know, the antennae are out, and so we may pick up on things that a few others may not.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, that's the wonderful thing about having a wide view, a wide perspective on things, and to have a multidisciplinary approach. And also, the most important thing is to never to allow the ego to get to the stage where you say to yourself, well, we have all the answers, you know, come to us if you want to know. You just, you know, exploring these things and asking the questions, and questions lead to more questions, you know.
Do you know, one of the things that is really important, and I think it's one of the beauties of science, is that actually it's pretty exciting to be wrong. Because if you actually find out that you're wrong about something, you've actually learnt something really quite profound. You know, because otherwise, if you're just constantly nudging back down the same furrow, then it never actually gives you those moments of real enlightenment. But when you have one of those, it does, it changes everything. And yeah, we find it very exciting. Never take anything for granted, question absolutely everything. And yeah, always, you know, in the true nature of science, always try to falsify your claims. Can you find anything that contradicts what you're trying to say? Because if you don't look for those conflicting things, I mean, you know, we haven't found any, but we do look all the time. We've certainly found things that make us re-evaluate. Sorry, I'm just trying to think of an example without having to go off on a half-hour.
What, you mean Brinketley V?
No, I mean that maybe that's a good example, but I was thinking more that you know, I mean, sometimes, I mean, for example, we have a thing, some of you may know, we have a thing, you know, that people talk about temples, and we profoundly believe that the majority of the sites that are called temples are actually to do with livestock, and you know, there's a lot of people really hate us saying that. But we've got an enormous amount of evidence that we've pulled together that backs this up. And we keep looking for stuff that contradicts it. And we haven't found anything that contradicts it, but what we have found is certain pieces of information that make you say, well, okay, it can't just have been that. That there must have been things that were multi-purpose. And it's always keeping those lines of inquiry open. Don't take anything for granted, and don't get so obsessed with being right that it stops you accepting other opinions.
100%. I think last year's revelations about the DNA and the relationships between people interred in some of our most ancient structures here in Ireland. Certainly, I think I discussed this already, but my Newgrange book, which was published in 2012, is due to be republished next year, but it's going to require substantial
goodness,
you know. I mean, I couldn't put it out again in the same form. There's just too much has changed. I mean, you can't sit still when as you say, when new evidence and information comes to light, you must revise your thinking, at least, even if only marginally. You must revise it. You can't just plow on with the same hypothesis and expect that it will stand the test of time, because as we've seen through generations of archaeology, especially in the past century and a half, the ideas pertaining to who built the monuments and what sort of people they were, and, you know, what their focus was, have changed dramatically, absolutely fundamentally, you know. It's a very interesting discussion. I wanted to follow on that question about your favorite period of history to ask you both probably what is the most facile question of the night, which is, what's your favorite monument?
Well, do you want to?
I do want to pick one favorite.
Well,
the trouble is we both land on the same one, don't we?
Yeah, we do. We do. When we were first asked that question, we both in unison said Callanish. I'd probably still say Callanish. Would you?
Yeah, it seems like a long time since we were there.
It does.
There's something about Callanish that there were many things came together for us traveling to Callanish, and filming there and coming away from it. It just left such an impression with us, and we feel that it's a relatively untouched. It's a place people don't talk about. Well, obviously, they don't talk about it anywhere near so much as Stonehenge. You don't get headlines about Callanish, and yet, that is one of the most extraordinary monuments and beautiful monuments you're ever likely to come across. Boy, has that place got a story to tell, and fingers crossed, we hope to be telling it before too long.
We've got another film
on a promise
there,
to make a film about Callanish specifically.
Brilliant. Sounds great. Yeah, I got the impression from watching the film that there was a particular awe about that place for you two.
Do you know the story about the synchronicity of us arriving there?
Well, just fill us in, and especially for those who aren't familiar.
So I'll try to make it as brief as possible. We were on the last leg of our journey filming, and we'd worked our way up through Derbyshire, through Cumbria, up through Argyll and Bute, Kilmartin Glen. Kilmartin Glen, we were stuck. It rained or it didn't. The winds poured. We were at the mercy of the elements as far as our itinerary was concerned, which is good. We were flexible. But I remember being at Kilmartin Glen and looking up through the clouds parted, and there was the moon. It was just waxing. I thought, oh my goodness, we're due in Callanish in a few days' time. Wouldn't it be fantastic if we arrived at Callanish, this lunar calendar, on the night of a full moon? That would be nice. Back in the camper. So more filming along the way. Missed the ferry over to Skye, was it, or from Skye to Uig to wherever it is. And upshot was we arrived March the whatever it was 2nd, 2007 on at Callanish on the night of the full moon. So arrived there and feeling pretty pleased with ourselves, and there was nobody there out of season, except there was a little rain shelter, a little green sort of rain shelter with two blokes in it. Rupert went down to say hello to them. I wandered off into the stones, saying, oh, wow, where can I point the camera? Those kinds of things. 10 minutes later, Rupert comes up to me and he says, do you know what those two blokes in the tent said to me? They said, are you here for the lunar eclipse as well?
I remember.
Yeah, we didn't know.
You were so you were so involved in making the film that you didn't realize you weren't reading.
I had no idea. You just hadn't thought.
The crazy thing is, though, that if we had scheduled it, there's no way we would have got there because of the weather. It was the fact that that we missed a ferry because of the weather. That we were actually stuck in one place we were shooting. We were stuck there for 3 days because of the weather. That if we'd actually scheduled it, that we'll be there. If we'd known it was a lunar eclipse and we were going to schedule it for that, then we wouldn't have done it. It would have been impossible. So it was the most extraordinary piece of synchronicity. It really was. And just to cap all that off, was that although Michael is Michael was christened John, but just nobody's ever called him John.
Yeah.
And so when we introduced, because when we got to Callanish, and as Mike said, these two guys in a shelter there was nobody else. It was just the four of us were the only people at the site. And it was, oh, what are your names? And it was John and Rupert. John and Rupert, meet John and Rupert. And they had driven 300 miles to be there.
Wow.
And we had come, I don't know how many miles we had come, but that was the thing, that not only had we by chance arrived at this place on the night of a lunar eclipse, but 2 Johns and 2 Ruperts were the only people that were there. What are the odds? I've met a few Johns in my life, but I've only met, in the whole of my life, I've only met 5 Ruperts. It's bizarre.
Anyway, it was, as you can imagine, that was a bit special. So it does have a special place in our hearts for all sorts of reasons.
I've spoken and written about synchronicity, and I've had a few remarkable examples of it happen. And it's usually a very good indication that you're on the right track. And I suppose at that stage, you must have realized that you were doing something very special. Do we have a handle on the age of Callanish? Just fill us in about where it fits in terms of what age it is. Is it Neolithic, is it, or is it early?
It's Neolithic, yeah. But again, it's one of those sites where we see something in its entirety. In fact, you might as well liken it to Stonehenge in this instance, because you look at a site in its entirety and you think that that's the way it was designed and built. And it's not, that you get this site that's put together over, we genuinely don't know how many years. And the thing about Callanish is that it is so complicated. All those astronomical alignments that, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, that there are some, reasonably tall standing stones that have but the whole site, if you look down on it, the whole site is kind of in the shape of a cross. And the thing is that there are loads of the stones that have these angles cut out of them, and they look kind of weird, except that if you stand in certain places around the site, then you'll have one stone that's cut like that and another stone that's cut like that. And they might be, a huge distance away from each other, but you can actually stand at a point where these things will line up. And people have been working on, oh God, senior moment. What's the name of the woman, Michael?
Margaret.
Margaret.
Well done.
Yeah.
That she's been working on the site for decades, trying to figure things out. And I don't know if we'll ever really know for sure, but clearly the place was constructed with all sorts of complex alignments in mind. And it's back to that thing of setting something in stone. How many generations, bearing in mind the weather in Scotland, how many generations would it take to know that you'd got that alignment right with whether you were putting sticks in the ground or what have you, before you actually put a stone in place? And then how many generations when you figured out that if you'd cut this angle, what did they do? Did they strap pieces of wood in place while they were figuring out if it was right? Because if the weather was rubbish for weeks on end, how would you know? So it's that thing of generation after generation after generation before something is right. I mean, the thing is that because they only cleared the peat away in, again, senior moment, I don't remember, 18, whatever it was. They cleared the peat away from the stones because prior to them clearing the peat away, it had grown up to the extent that you wouldn't really have known that there was a megalithic site there at all. But I don't believe to this day that it's all been properly dated. So you've got something that, that it's, if you're going to take an average age on it, it's 5,000 years old. But it's very probable that the overall construction could have been a start and finish date that was, even a window of 1,000 years, maybe more.
We will get back to our study of Callanish far more, though, I think, in the coming months.
We will.
So
yes.
Check back with us there. I just must say, I just noticed there's a vast number of our Patreon supporters on the call.
Well, hello, darlings.
Hello to all the Prehistory Guys patrons. You're all very welcome. When you visited Ireland,
good folks.
Was there anything in particular about the Irish, sort of particularly the Neolithic monumental landscape that sort of struck you as sort of standing out compared to what you'd seen in Britain?
The numbers.
Yeah.
Sheer numbers.
Yeah. We did a sequence in the film, didn't we? Where we couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
We could not believe what we were looking at. Because we did a stupid thing, but we
just the one.
we saw how many sites there were on the maps, and we thought, wow, how many can we do? You know, do you reckon, can we do 10 in an hour? Do you think? And so we just got in the car to see if we could just tick them off the map, just to make the point of how many there were. And the thing was that it got a bit tricky, because a lot of them, you can see where it is on the map, but it's only when you get close that you realise it's across barbed wire on somebody's private land.
Well, that's it. The upshot of that day was that we nearly died in a bog near Urach.
Oh, happy days.
Yeah, because it got too late. It was so dark. I remember carrying the gear and I couldn't see it. My head torch had failed for some reason. I thought, I'm never coming out of this bog. Nobody will ever know.
Find
a deserted camp.
It was the sheer, but not only the number, but also the people have a different relationship to them. They're still present in the landscape for people as things, as things that need to be recognised and honoured and talked about. Because on that day, when we were trying to film stuff, we got obsessed with, we saw cross-inscribed stone on the Ordnance Survey map, and we got obsessed with finding it. Not only did the first thing we found was the farmer who owned the land as we were driving past. It was, lads, come on in.
He was a character. Yeah.
Gee whiz, but telling a story. This it's just a lump of stone in the ground with a little cross inscribed on it. But he was telling stories in his living memory of people coming up from the village, up the road, coming into the field, going round this stone, bit of stone and circling out again. You think, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
It's still all going on then.
Yeah.
Patterns. Yeah. Like that is considered a Christian thing, but to be honest.
Yeah, sure.
Like Christianity in Ireland became what you might call a folk religion. It had so many leftovers from what had come before that sometimes it was hard to separate what was pre-Christian or pagan, if you wish, and Christian. Remarkable stuff. And like a lot of those red dots look so accessible on the map, but when you get to the landscape, you find myself and Richard Moore spent many an hour of an evening, summertime, and sometimes in the winter, looking for standing stones and things, being chased by herds of bullocks and all sorts of stuff. One could describe it as fun, but it depends on what one's definition of fun was. Did you have a favourite monument in Ireland?
Oh, that's a thing, isn't it?
For probably unusual reasons for me, I really love Maeve's Cairn.
I was just about to say, I had a feeling there was something very impressive about that.
The thing about Maeve's Cairn for me is that it's so huge. And if you compare it with any similar site in terms of its construction, then, it's almost a given, all right, you can't say 100%, but it's almost a given that there is a significant tomb inside it. And for somebody to have been buried in something so vast on the top of the most significant hill anywhere in the region, that
with a view,
with a view, yeah, good point. That burial must be phenomenal in there, and I hope that with technology being the way it is, I love the idea. It's a little fantasy of mine that you could have these laser scanning cranes that go up, and you have no people involved. It's just all automatic laser scanning, that the cranes go up and they can completely scan everything and take this rock off and this rock off and this rock off, because they can put it all back again afterwards. You know, the technology is going to be there just so that you could dismantle the whole thing, find the burial inside it, and then put it all back together afterwards. You know, that might be 200 years away, but it's going to be doable. Just
non-destructive archaeology. Wow.
Yes.
Well, I've even been talking about that perhaps in the future we'll have nanotechnology helping us, very tiny robots that can find spaces between rocks and go in and retrieve samples and take pictures and come back out again. Who knows? As you say, the technology is improving all the time. I was up there last September and made a film which was initially for the patrons and later released publicly. And like that, you cannot fail to be impressed. It takes a labor of effort to, depending on your age and your fitness levels, of course, it takes an effort just to walk up the hill. But the idea of walking up the hill and carrying large boulders around the place, it is just, and it's just so typical of the whole megalithic world on the periphery of Europe, that everywhere you go, you see these gigantic monuments, and built by people who didn't have access to much technology, pre-metallurgy. And sometimes, Rupert, you know, I kind of got that impression in the film that you just literally have to stand there and just take it all in, and then just say, wow. You know, it's just a wow moment. And there's nothing you can say. You're speechless at times, you know?
Yeah. Do you know what? I think that's one of, again, you know, Mike's skill as a storyteller. You know, I write these words, and it's always Michael who, you know, he'll say to me, I want to shoot that again, and I want to shoot that again. I want to do it again from here, and I want to do it again from here. Because in his head, he's already woven together how this is going to look. And that doesn't happen in my head. You know, it's I write these words because I have this vision of this is what I want to tell people. But, you know, Mike's the one that's done that. And so particularly there's the sequence at Skara Brae where I'm so profoundly moved by being there, apart from
I told him to be moved.
He did.
I said, get down there, down there in that room, number one,
exude,
get emoting.
Yeah, I mean, I think he did a good job at getting that across, really, because there are times when, as you say, there are times when you don't really understand what it is that you're with, but you know that it was of such profound importance to the builders. You know, that your mind can go in all sorts of directions trying to make sense of what was going on. But it's when you can share a space with somebody, you know, that they may have been dead for 5,000 years, but when you know that you're standing, and that's why Skara Brae was so profound, because you can stand in a space where you absolutely know that the people who lived there stood right here, or they sat right here. You can actually get into that space where, if you could transport yourself back 5,000 years, they're sitting in your lap. You know, that to me is immense, because that takes a lot of the conjecture away. Is that you don't need to understand blah. It's the fact that you are sharing that, you know, this your little moment of, you know, our fleeting lives on this planet, and you can share a space with somebody from thousands of years ago. Yeah, I love that.
I get the same when I go to the likes of Newgrange or less well-known Fornox, you know. Stand in that space and understand that you're making a very, very direct connection, you know, with people who lived a long, long time ago. And as you say, there's an emotive aspect to it, you know. and you realize the fragility of a human life, and then you realize that these people made an effort to memorialize themselves, or something of their beliefs to survive long into the future. Were you impressed by the amount of mythology pertaining to the monuments in Ireland? Isn't that a thing that really separates Ireland from Britain? Is there's so much folklore and mythology that we still have pertaining to the monuments compared to across the water?
To be fair, I think that came afterwards, and largely through getting to know you better, and the fact that you filter so much of this stuff through that lens, through the lens of the mythology. I don't think back then we were quite so aware of the direct connection that there was in the mythology, so deep back in time.
Yeah. I'd go further than that, really, and that's that for me. Whilst I'm utterly enthralled by your knowledge of Irish mythology, we don't have any of that mythology in the rest of the British Isles, really. No. Okay, there's the odd story here and there, but there isn't a mythology quite like that. And we deliberately avoided a lot of those stories because one of the things that certainly was, it was important to me, I think it was important to both of us, that one of the things that we wanted to get across is these are the facts. These are what we know. And we did comment, I mean, Rollright Stones was maybe a good example where there's mythology that says, and it's one of those rare sites in England where mythology says, and you've got these different stories of whether it's King Rollo or whatever, that they're all nonsense. That that if you actually look at the history of that legend, then when that happened was thousands of years after the sites were built. So we actively didn't get into mythologies because they might actually be taking you away from the truth of the structure. Now, with Irish mythology, and this is something that we didn't know at the time. In fact, I'll put my hand up to say I am still massively ignorant about Irish mythology. And when I want to know something, you are the very person that I will talk to. Because your knowledge of Irish mythology is really pretty damn extensive. And it's one of the things that is most interesting about Irish mythology, and I've only learned this from talking with you, is that you do seem to be able to take a strand from way back then and just pull it right the way through history. Now that's not something you can do elsewhere.
Yeah, but I have to sort of say that there are a lot of experts on sort of early Irish and medieval history here who would argue probably that, a lot of the mythology was corrupted or invented. Some of the stories were invented by the monks based on epic mythology and biblical tales that they had encountered on their travels in Europe. But I'm a firm believer that at the core of all of these stories, there is, as is always the case, there is an element of truth in them. And who can say, because we have evidence from around the world about the survival, the durability of oral tradition across not just generations, but hundreds and sometimes thousands of years. That, the DNA one was a great example when you had me on your show to talk about, and there were actually 3 myths pertaining to the Boyne Valley monuments about incest. And look, you can still dismiss that, and you can still say, well, that, some of those stories were, influenced by, the Tower of Babylon and, themes of incest from the Bible, etc., etc. But you can keep making that argument. But the other side of that coin is that if you examine the stories and you see the symbolism of solstices and standing still suns, there's something in you that has to recognize that there's a possibility that some of those aspects of the stories go much further back. I must ask you, when COVID-19 has become a thing of the past, are you planning to come back to Ireland?
Yes.
Hell yeah, we've actually we've got schedules. In fact, if it hadn't been for COVID, we would be coming to Ireland this year.
Yeah.
But,
for different purposes, you know, we wanted to do a tour. The context for that, we already had done a tour in 2019, which was wonderfully successful with a small band of intrepid folk from across the Atlantic. We took them from Orkney down to Stonehenge via all sorts over 2 weeks. You know, we just had a fantastic time. We wanted to repeat that over in Ireland. But we'll be coming back to Ireland anyway because we've got a film to make.
Indeed we do. We do. Yeah.
Okay, well, that was going to be a question, which is there going to be another film? So you may answer that one now.
Yes, it's funny you catch us, you know, right on the cusp after having been, you know, kicked into, you know, producing stuff for YouTube, for YouTube, and especially with lockdown, not being able to get out there and do the sort of films that we usually like to make. You know, actually visiting actual places. We've been a completely desktop-based outfit, pretty much, apart from the odd little adventure. But we realised that we've got narrow. That YouTube had started running us.
Yeah.
And we were a bit running ragged, and suddenly the penny dropped a few days ago. Hang about. We need to get back in the driving seat. And what excites us? The thought of doing another film. So we're right now, starting now, is turning things around and making the whole thing about, and we'll be talking, Patreon folk, we'll be talking to you about this on Thursday.
Yes, we will.
Turning the whole thing around and making it about making Standing with Stones 2. Right. Yes, we'll continue the output to YouTube. Yes, we'll continue the podcast. Yes, we'll continue the interviews. But those will be gateway drugs to getting people involved in helping us make the next film.
Fantastic. Great news. Delighted to hear that. And can't wait to welcome you back to Ireland.
Do you know what? We're looking forward to it. And we're particularly looking forward to going out and seeing some sites with you.
That'll be a bit of fun. I look forward to that. That'll be a nice way to end lockdowns and to look at COVID as that nasty thing that had us all housebound for a while. Yeah.
Yes.
Look forward to that. I just have a few questions left. At this stage, if anybody wants to ask a live question, perhaps you might just indicate in the chat that you want to ask a question, and Tracy might just keep tabs on the names. Who has your favorite guest been on your podcast /interview? I'm not going to ask you least favorite, okay?
No, sure. God, they've all been so great in their own way. Oh, gosh, from Tim sprang to mind because it was such a wonderful thing to get Tim Darvill on, sort of fairly early on in the things, and he was very illuminating. But do you know what? I really enjoyed talking to Lee Bray the other day, who you won't have heard of, but he's the lead archaeologist for the whole of Dartmoor. And it's a really great conversation about depth of time in a singular place, and looking through prehistory in a very tight environment. And I just, for the sheer, the different kind of perspective that he brings to that, it's not out yet, I have to say. I'm still working on it. So it was done quite recently.
He was good. I think who else has been? I mean, they've been so good in different ways.
I think Kenny was one of the.
Kenny Brophy, Kenny Brophy was great. Kenny, Scottish archaeologist. We've still got a lot of things to talk about with him. Yeah, he was good. He was good. Vince Gaffney was brilliant. We do like Vince. Vince was the lead archaeologist. If you don't know, folks, you probably saw in the news 2 years ago, or it might have been last year, that it was
the discovery was
actually a while ago.
Regurgitating.
Vince was the lead archaeologist on those massive pits that were found in the huge circle around Durrington Walls near Stonehenge.
Yeah.
He's done some extraordinary work in his career.
Well, I mean, he's been such at the forefront of the whole remote sensing thing. I mean, that's he's Vince Gaffney, MBE, isn't he? Yes, he is, isn't he?
Yes.
Is
he MBE or OBE? Tim's OBE.
I think. He's MBE, because you don't hear the name pop up, but this guy's right at the forefront of the stuff that we depend on, for getting this new data out of places, of the remote sensing, geophys, and all that. He single-handedly, created the whole of the what's the word? Exploration of Doggerland over the past 10 years, whatever. He's just one of those forces of nature, quite modest in his own way, character, but just one of these guys that gets things done, and he gets ships sailing out over the, across the North Sea, and grabbing all the data from the North Sea oil industry, which people wouldn't normally get. He's one of these people around which serendipity happens, just because they're there and they talk.
Yeah. But no, we've been very lucky, very lucky. I mean, Alison Sheridan was another one. I mean, she is,
and she's a giant in her way. Like Maul, she's a great person to have on our side. Force of nature again.
Yeah, brilliant. So, do you have to do much reading and research before each podcast or interview?
Yes. We try as hard as we can to get over on their side.
Yeah. I mean, apart from anything else, it's discourteous if you presume to ask somebody if they'll come on for an interview and you haven't even read their papers. And the trouble is that the difficulty sometimes is that so two examples. You can either get somebody like Tim Darvill or Alison Sheridan, who have been so prolific in their careers that it's like, where do you even start? And then you get people like we're interviewing a chap called Harry Robson shortly, this middle of April. Now, Harry, he's a young archaeologist, but he is just driving the new technology that's all about being able to really scrape the inside of a broken pot and tell you what was in it. Because you can now run all these biochemical tests for enzymes and proteins and and strontium within any of those, so that you can tell what was in it, where it came from, and all this. I mean, the technology is just mind-boggling, and that's changing everything. So it's going to be a really exciting conversation.
We're just in an interview with James Dilley.
Yeah, James, the experimental archaeologist who.
Yeah. He's he's the go-to reenactor, living history, flint napper, stone implement maker. Yeah,
it has to be said. The great thing about interviewing James is that the whole conversation, and we knew, right from the outset, the whole thing was about practicalities with him. How do you do this? And how did you make that? And what can you tell us about finding ores and doing blah? It was all very practical stuff. Whereas you get someone like Harry, and to actually be able to ask Harry sensible questions, we have to read these papers that are so dry, because we're reading this stuff about biochemistry, and it's like,
how are we going to ask a question without sounding really stupid?
Yeah, it's a tricky one. Which means that, I go back, do you know, I don't know if any of you did this when you were at school, that if you had to write a project and you didn't have anything, and you'd left it too late. I was terrible at doing homework. And resources of information, Ladybird books. Do you guys remember Ladybird books? And it was like, wow, now there's a précis that you can really milk
You can
that.
depend on.
And I still have, not Ladybird books. I'm a bit too old for Ladybird books now, but I do still have these the sorts of books that, you know, they're not idiots' guides to, but you know, the idiot's book of such and such might as well be. And I've got you know, everything you need to know about physics, things like that. So sometimes if you just want to know something basic, it's like, I know that's in there somewhere, but I don't remember. I just look up, you know, in the idiot book, and sometimes that just gives you enough clarity to sound like you know what you're talking about.
Yeah. There was a wonderful series of books called Bluff Your Way In, wasn't there?
Well, we're good at it. We keep at it. Two more questions. Do either of you have any hobbies outside of, you know, the Prehistory Guys?
Yes.
I have a guitar sitting over here that hardly ever gets.
I've got a drum kit over there.
Oh wow!
That hardly ever gets played.
That's a very pretty guitar.
It is. It's the wrong way up.
Um,
It's very nice. Ibanez.
Wow. Sorry.
I'm not even very good, but you know.
Said the man who composed and performed all the music on Standing with Stamps.
Yes. What a talent.
So you know, you can keep that. I'm not very good. He's perfectly serviceable.
Yeah. I didn't play any of those notes right the first time. That's the wonderful thing about having everything, you know, in the computer here. Nobody else about. I can put the things in any order I like.
Listen, some of the greatest prog albums ever made were put together exactly like that.
Yeah,
so
I think you're right.
No shame.
Yeah.
No shame. But no, other hobbies, well, it depends what you mean by a hobby, really. I mean, my natural history work, even though the Prehistory Guys is now it's our full-time job, really. It's what we do all day, every day, all day, most days. But natural history is still a big thing for me. So even though this is now my day job, I'm still spending an awful lot of time, you know, every day. Do you know, I have a swimming pool. All right. Now, one of my joys is that twice a day, I will go and scoop the swimming pool because insects get stuck in the water. Can't tell you what a joy it is to go out and save all these little lives and have a good look at what it is that you've actually found. I get so many different species in my pool. That's a joy for me.
Yeah.
Is that a hobby?
Have you told folk about metamorphosis? Nobody will know about metamorphosis.
No, I haven't mentioned metamorphosis. It seemed like an irrelevance, really. I can...
Nonsense, Rupert. It's all about you, mate.
I can't hear you now. Hold on a moment.
Oh, look, there's a drum kit.
That's my last book, which was 4 years' work. That was,
wow.
And that was all photographing the life cycles of insects because basically there is so much stuff that that people don't understand or know about the insect world, and what goes on down there in those little lives is just utterly fabulous. Look, there's that's molting out of its skin into its new skin, and that little critter is about 3 millimeters long.
Wow.
There's
and Rupert shot the entirety of that book in the room behind him there.
I did, yeah. There's just a couple of pictures that were outside, but that was one of the one of the real challenges was because I had to to show a good cross section. I had creatures from all over the world, and so if I've got a critter from South America, for example, so all these tanks that I don't know if you can see them. I've got tanks around the room, and So they're temperature controlled and they're humidity controlled. And if you import a critter from South America to photograph its life cycle, then you've got to have the plants that they eat. So I had to get the right plants, South American plants, and make sure that I kept the whole damn lot alive so that I could photograph the entire life cycle over as many months as it took. And that's why the whole book took, 4 years.
That is dedicated work.
It was... Yeah, my wife called herself a bug widow for rather a long time.
Lots of macro lenses, I presume.
Yes, yeah. I mean, some of the critters in there, the things that you just take for granted that, you see a little bug, but when the eggs that they come out of, the egg might be smaller than a millimeter. So to photograph them hatching is that was that was tricky.
Nutter,
and of course you
nutter.
don't know, but the thing is you don't know when it's going to happen.
Yeah.
So you just have to sit there and wait. And
Right.
there were all sorts of things where I was sitting waiting for a shot for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks. Yeah.
Reading archaeological journals to pass the time.
No, because if you take your eye off it, then it might happen while you're not looking. And so, it's very zen.
I think that is, hats off. That is dedicated work. Sounds fascinating, by the way.
Thank you. It really is, and it is a huge passion of mine. But I think one thing that Mike and I both feel very, very strongly about, excuse me while I rewire myself properly, is that we are really fussy about quality. It's like we're not interested in doing something that's not absolutely as good as we can make it. Otherwise, just why bother? So we do put a lot of effort into keeping the quality as high as we possibly can. Whether that's rewriting because I'm not quite happy with the way those words go together, or reshooting because that angle could be better or whatever. I mean, the amount of times, if you see the bloopers reel, there's one particular sequence up at the Claver Cairns in Scotland where I say repeatedly, now these are different, now these are different, now these are different, now these are different. And that's because every single time it was like Michael said, no, do that one again. 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 Oh, I walked. Do you know what? It's all right for the proclaimers.
You literally walked by.
Yeah, we must do the math sometime. Yeah.
I imagine you did. At this point, thank you for what has been. I mean, we could literally go on for hours. We could.
We enjoy your company, Anthony.
Well,
look forward to seeing you when we're next over.
Feeling is mutual. It's always enjoyable. And the other thing that I love about the Prehistory Guys is the spontaneous giggling. Just all of a sudden there are two guys on the screen giggling and laughing like two young fellas, and it's so enjoyable to watch. Self-effacing and human. It's a lovely human.
Do you know something that we don't really understand at all? Is sometimes we get comments on YouTube of people who really don't like the fact that it's like, what are these guys laughing about all the time? It's like, it's just they hate the fact that we giggle a lot. And I say, well, all right, pick another channel then, because I don't care.
Right. Absolutely. We have a few questions. I know it's running late, and I had a couple of questions by email that I'm just going to have to skip at this stage. But do you know what? We'll maybe have you back for part 2, and we'll have more questions from.
Take a note. Happy to come back and answer.
One of our most regular viewers is Desiree Riley, who's in Louisiana.
Hello, Desiree.
Hi there. Hiya.
Hello. First of all, y'all accents. I'm from America. Oh my God, I just love listening to all of y'all talk together. Oh my God, it's so great. And I want to know how y'all three all met. Like, how did Anthony meet y'all?
I think, yes, it was when I was when we'd finished Standing with Stones and the DVD was there, I was looking all over the place, for like-minded people through which, to help promote the DVD. And I think, that's how it was, you know, it was, I was looking for a commercial outlet, I think, wasn't I, Anthony? Because you had Mythical Ireland obviously was already there, and you had a shop open. I think the negotiation was really about, you know, whether the DVD could be something you could.
I did a brief video review of it. I did a
video yes, of course review. You did. Yeah.
It's still on YouTube. It's on the channel. I must share it later on. The reason I'm embarrassed is because that was 2008. I mean, if you look at it, I'm so young and fresh and so tentative. It's like I'm nearly afraid camera, you know.
Weren't we all?
But I must share that. That's exactly how we met. You reached out and said, and you sent me it, and I watched it and was very impressed and was only too happy to give it a plug. So that's how we met. 13 years ago now.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you all so much for coming on. Y'all are great. I have like 20 more questions, but we'll wait for the next show.
Hey, good to see you.
Diana,
take care.
Is our next question is from Diana Courtman.
Diana, here she comes.
Hello, Diana.
Oh, hello, Diana.
Hiya.
Hiya.
Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, we can hear you fine.
Technology. I just wanted to ask, when you were talking about going to Callanish and being there by mistake for the lunar eclipse, what did you see the lunar eclipse? What is a lunar eclipse like?
Oh,
or was it too cloudy? Or
no, we were lucky that the clouds did actually part. We had a splendid night. We were up until 3-4 in the morning watching that go by, watching the shadow of the Earth, pass across the face of the moon. And to observe that actually happening in that place was just, one of those memories that you can't make up, really, can you?
It was another glorious piece of the synchronicity was that we had foul weather all the way. And, as I said earlier, that, we were days behind our schedule because we had just been waiting for it to stop tipping down so that we could film. And we got to Callanish, and it was still pretty horrible. When we got there, it had stopped raining, but it was still thick cloud and just horrible. But that night, everything cleared. The skies cleared. It was an absolutely cloudless sky, just stars and a lunar eclipse. And as Mike said, we stayed up all night. We eventually went to bed about 4 o'clock, and we got up in the morning, and it was thick cloud and pouring with rain again. It was just, the whole thing was a gift.
And you can imagine down a bit further down south at Stonehenge, it would have been a quite different story because, of course, I think there would have been a heck of a lot of people there. There was 4 of us, and there were 2 other folk turned up with a couple of bottles of wine. And at one of the most significant megalithic sites anywhere, there were just these 6 people and a bottle of wine.
And a dog.
Was there a dog? Yeah.
It's going to get more crowded now. You realise that.
Well, I suppose one of the joys of somewhere like Callanish is that it's not just a drive, is it?
You've got to be intentional
really
about
got
going
to,
there.
You've got to be pretty dedicated.
Yeah.
So
it's
never
not just off the A303 between London and Bristol.
Thanks for your question. Lovely to have you along.
Cheers, Diane.
Thanks, Diana.
Conversation. Our next question is from Helen. Helen, you might help me pronounce your surname. Actually, Helen was one of the people who emailed her question, so this is great because you're going to get the chance to ask live. There you go.
Hi, Helen.
Hi.
How are you?
It's been a great evening. I had a question, and I have more than one. So this is the one I have. Anthony took a photo probably a couple of weeks ago now of 2 reflecting pools. And I wondered if you had noticed at any other stone sites the use of reflecting waters, reflecting as part of the stone site.
Well, how off the top of my head, no.
Certainly, have we? No. Places that we are aware that there is the theory that this could have been a function, That's something else. So particularly Silbury Hill is probably the biggest, because we do know that there was a period in its history when it was deliberately surrounded by a moat. And so there is theory that would have been about celestial reflections. I don't know if I agree with that or not, but it's certainly a possibility. And then some of the rock art, where you get cut markings and what have you, that the notion that they were filled with water to reflect the heavens, and I certainly think that's a distinct possibility.
Helen, have you come across Tim Darvill's thoughts about rock art, and particularly to do with the Presellis, and his theory that, or his conjecture would probably be the better way of putting it, that based in the mythology and folklore around there of the healing properties of the bluestone rocks in the Presellis, and that if you associate those rocks with water, then that water obtains healing properties. And that's why he says that the bluestones of Preseli may have been taken to Stonehenge because they had those healing properties, and sort of Stonehenge became a Lourdes of the late Neolithic. For that reason, I find that very plausible, because whenever I've looked at rock art, I've thought, oh, that looks best when you've got water on it or in it, creating little pools and circles. But that's probably away from your original question. But
no, that's right on. Thank you so much.
Where are you, Helen?
I'm in South Dakota. This is my backyard in summer.
Okay,
Lovely.
cool.
Lovely. It's just such great scenery behind you.
Yeah,
Fantastic.
Fantastic.
Thanks a lot.
Those double pools are so, I think, unique, and we don't yet know. There are a couple of single ones at Brunabonia as well, and they're labelled on archaeological maps as being possible ritual ponds. We don't yet know whether they're man-made or not. They certainly do look like it. My own feeling about the double pond at Newgrange is that there's such strong traditions there about the swans, the whooper swans, and they like water, that one is led to believe that maybe they were there as part of some ritualistic purpose around the whooper swans that come in great numbers to Newgrange at the time.